The Honourable Christopher Finlayson.
I was disappointed in that snarky and frankly underwhelming contribution from Mr Mark. He's capable of better, and I think on this important day the House deserve better. Because today the Prime Minister has announced that New Zealand military personnel will fulfil a non-combat behind-the-wire mission to train Iraqi security services so that they are better prepared to fight ISIL, or as Mr Brownlee calls them, Daesh, in their region. And the government has very, very carefully considered options to expand the New Zealand contribution to the coalition beyond the humanitarian assistance that we are already providing. Today's announcement, sir, is in line with a fine New Zealand tradition of providing this sort of support where we can. As the Prime Minister has said, we have an obligation to support stability. We have an obligation to support the international rule of law. And it's exactly the same obligation that Helen Clark relied on when she sent 70 engineers to Iraq. Mr Speaker, it's quite frankly lazy thinking to believe that New Zealand sits in some kind of benign environment due to its distance from the Middle East. We do not. In a practical respect, of course, there are hundreds and thousands of New Zealanders who risk being directly affected by terrorism. But more than this, New Zealand is a global citizen. We are not insulated from events in the rest of the world. And I was interested to hear Mr Flavel talk about the three most peaceful nations on earth, Denmark, Norway and this country. Well, look at what has just happened in Denmark. And just a few days ago, Norway's police security service have advised that a terrorist attack is likely in the coming year. Who is immune? No one. That's right. And as the Prime Minister has said, we cannot stand idly by while these extremists throw people off buildings because of their sexuality, burn people alive, rape and torture women, behead civilians and turn children into killers. As a distinguished commentator said recently, it is no mere collection of psychopaths and adventure seekers. It is a group with carefully considered beliefs, among them that it is a key agent of the coming apocalypse. So, Mr Speaker, it's simply not good enough for people like Kennedy Graham to say it's not our problem. Of course it's our problem. The world has seen groups like Daesh emerge before, though not at the same speed and to the same extent, at least in recent history. But there are too many examples from history for us not to have learned that when others stand by and do nothing, we pay the consequences later on. Mr Speaker, all of us have watched in horror at the rise of this death cult. They follow a perverted interpretation of Islam that labels anyone who disagree with them as infidels and inflicts extreme terror and violence on others. And just this afternoon, we've seen videos of Kurdish fighters being paraded in cages throughout streets. They are extremely well funded, extremely well organised and highly skilled at recruitment. It has been labelled the best resourced terror organisation in recent history. It obtains its money through extortion, oil fields, looting and smuggling. It has an active bureaucracy. It is attempting to function like a state. As of today, Daesh controls territory in Iraq, Syria and eastern Libya, an area similar in size to New Zealand. 8 million Iraqis and Syrians live in areas controlled by Daesh. Its self-declared goal is to form an Islamic state, to establish itself as a caliphate with absolute authority and power. And Mr Speaker, we're all too acutely aware of the terror and the brutality that Daesh is inflicting on the people of Syria and Iraq. And I remind Mrs King of the suffering of her constituents in the Assyrian community in Miramar as they learn what is happening to their relatives in Mosul. There is no argument that the actions of Daesh are to be condemned. But condemnation, I say to Mrs. King, is easy. The question of action is a more difficult one. A range of opinions have been expressed in the House today about how New Zealand could contribute. What the Prime Minister has announced is a very strong and sensible one. Currently, 62 countries are part of an international coalition against Daesh. New Zealand will bring significant expertise to the training of Iraqi soldiers. Our reputation for this sort of work is very good and with reason. We've heard the concern today raised that standing up to Daesh through a training mission increases the risk to New Zealand. But quite frankly, it's naive to think that the status quo guarantees our safety. We are, and are rightly so, concerned about our safety. It is not an isolated threat. We're well aware, all of us in this House, about the attacks on Ottawa, Copenhagen, Paris and Sydney, all of them either directly or indirectly linked or inspired by Daesh. There's no guarantee that New Zealand will stay off this list, and it's not a matter of being alarmist, it's a matter of facing reality. The fight against this evil organisation will not be a straightforward one. It will be difficult and it will be dangerous. But today's announcement gets the required level of intervention right. Deploying a non-combat training mission to Iraq will help promote stability in the region. It will degrade Daesh's strength and will reduce the threat that it poses internationally. And I say this to Kennedy Graham about his suggestion as to how we could help. Quite frankly, it's foolish. It would expose New Zealanders to a far greater risk of injury or death than what is being proposed now. Let me, in closing, remind the House of the well-known words of that fine, young, brave supermarket employee when giving his reasons for hiding Jewish customers during the recent terrorist attack on Paris. He said, "It's not a question of Jews or Christians or Muslims. We're all in the same boat and we have to help each other to get out of this crisis." Exactly.